6 feet underground.
Welcome back to the lab. So let's forget the plans for a moment and talk about content creation planning. First of all, content. Content. Big word, right? It's actually not that big. I mean, it's only 7 letters, but it's a giant word because it can literally mean just about anything, any kind of words, images, videos, design that we make in business. Anything that communicates is content. So how do we even think about building a content plan or a content planning process? Isn't that a little like building a words plan or a pictures plan? Well, to be clear, we're not talking about the company's overall approach to content. We might call that our content strategy. What we're talking about here is a level lower. It's planning, the flow, our workflow of our content so that we can actually scale and manage it better. It's continuous. It doesn't stop. It's not a once-a-year activity. Planning never ends. It's a verb versus a noun, the true difference between planning and plans. Now, this planning process should be a continuing part of our overall content and content marketing strategy. A great content planning process serves as your bridge from your content strategy to how you execute your overall business or marketing strategy. It is the documented and operational framework for the workflow and how you'll transform all those wonderful brand, product, and service messages into stories, marketing copy, sales content, web copy. All of that due to engage, inspire, educate, and ultimately convince the prospects they should become customers of yours. And that, we need to start with something. So where do we start? Well, the first thing we need to do is to distinguish the two sides of this bridge that I just mentioned and what the bridge actually consists of. This will help us understand why the bridge is such an important piece to this overall strategy. As I mentioned, content strategy is one side of the bridge. A great content strategy is an organized approach to all the content being generated in our business. It's an approach. How do we speak as a business? So that we have a business-wide plan for the creation, delivery, and the governance of the content, the communication that we're creating. So really, visually, you can think of it like a hub with many standardized bridges out to nodes on a network. A content strategy might include everything from how we structure content, how we apply metadata attributes to it for search purposes, how we create guidelines for content management, how it's stored in our content management and digital asset management systems, to themes and topics and messaging architectures, and on and on and on. And there are plenty of great resources that we have, as well as that you can find out there on how to build your centralized content strategy. The critical point is that content strategy is usually much more holistic. It could include product content, customer manuals, help content, onboarding, training, distributor, retail partner level content, contract, legal, compliance-oriented content, basically anything that the business communicates. And so, there should be a content planning process for each and every one of those areas. And this is why we separate it out into its own idea. Content strategy is an overall hub of our business strategy, of which our content planning process and workflow is but one part. So let's keep it in the marketing maker world for just a moment and talk about marketing and communications as one node on that network, the other side of the bridge, if you will. Our content marketing strategy consists of a very specific subset of all the content we're concerned with in the business. We have to think about our customer's journey and how we're helping to facilitate that journey. And usually we're most focused on the beginnings of that journey when we're trying to pull or lure prospective customers into becoming leads, opportunities, and ultimately customers. Now, just a quick side note, it might be for our content planning and marketing that we might find that that process is perfectly suitable for other bridges that we might be making as well. As we assemble this kind of workflow, well, we might find that it works great for product content or loyalty content or training content or other elements of our content strategy. And we may be responsible for those as well because we're a smaller business or because we're in the head of a multiple team or we head up content strategy for our business full stop. And so one content planning process may cover many parts. But for simplicity's sake, for now, we're just going to focus on marketing since, well, I'm me and this is this show and this is where we are. So we must ask then, how do we incorporate planning in order to operate with the overall business content strategy? So this is where we get to our content planning process. Remember, it's continuous. So content planning, as the name would imply, is our documented, prioritized decision-making process to handle marketing content. There's another famous quote, "If you fail to plan, you plan to fail," which is often attributed to Ben Franklin. And this is the real purpose of what it is we're doing, planning on which decisions will be the right ones to best execute upon our content that feeds our marketing strategy. So as we think about which content we want to create, which content we should create, well, the containers for what's going to go into those things, well, and the channels they live on, let's build out a 5-step continuous workflow process that helps us incorporate planning into each and every step. How do we plan for strategic, or quite frankly not so strategic, ideas that are then developed, then prioritized for which content should be created and produced, that can be planned to be internally merchandised to its appropriate purpose, then activated and promoted accordingly so that it can be measured effectively, which helps provide the insight into why we're creating the next round. These are the 5 steps in a great content plan, making the operational decisions about how this will actually happen. This is the content planning bridge from content strategy to marketing strategy. So let's go over each of these so that you can get a better understanding of what each step along the bridge looks like. So, when we think about the responsibilities of creating content, the first place our heads go is, well, let's open up Photoshop and get it done, or let's start writing, or let's call an agency. Actually, the first thing we want to do is to determine which ideas can create bigger ideas from our messaging architecture or the value propositions or the brand. Let's not prioritize assets, the containers, just yet. Let's figure out the right content or stories we want to tell. Remember, not containers, not channels, not yet. Just ideas, bigger ideas, stories, things that can be pulled apart. So for example, maybe we're a financial services business and we want to be thought leaders to owners of small and medium-sized businesses, or SMBs, if you will. And of course, thought leadership is a big piece of how we want to go to market. So one of the strategic ideas that somebody has is a request for content, let's say for a blog post about why SMBs need or should partner with other SMBs. They want the post to offer up easy to understand ways to get knowledge for SMB owners on financial or other sophisticated concepts. Well, that's not simply a blog post. That's a container. That's a big idea. You can already imagine all kinds of different ways that topic might be covered and the voice that they might do it in. They might develop a helper spokesperson. They might get influencers to chime in on this topic. They might develop a game or a university kind of class or even an entire university course. Or maybe they just provide easy to access, straightforward information. The story needs to be developed. Or not. They may actually hate that idea. But once the story and the content has been developed a bit and decisions have been made that this could fit into our overall strategy, well, that's when it hits the second part of the workflow, created and produced. That's right. Once we've started our content creation production process, well, we have to have a planning process to manage that. We'll look at our calendar. We will assign resources, including ourselves probably, to not only create content, but to produce all the designs and the outputs as well. But remember, we've already planned various outputs. So we're not just creating one output, we're creating multiple outputs for the same story, leveraging the same content, the contents of that package. So for example, our financial services company, let's look at them. We might do the finer points of payroll, and so we're creating this core content, which might be a script for the explainer video series, but then there's the visuals for the video, and then the script could also be used as the source materials for 3 or 4 blog posts. The visuals could also then be repurposed to be great promoted social posts. And while we're recording the influencer doing the explainer script, well, We could schedule another 20 minutes with that influencer to get their take on payroll and examples, which itself could be another 2 or 3 blog posts and social posts and on and on. The whole idea of this is that we're planning on making decisions on creating fewer, bigger ideas, stories, content that can be translated into many, many small expressions of that story that can fill many, many containers that we need. So map these things out. Make a content planning process the basis of an asset planning process. And even just a simple content calendar like the one that you see on the screen here can help. Now, there are also robust technology solutions that can help you get true insight into the entire process here, but you're mapping not only when content is created, but how it is planned and produced as well. And that gets us to the next step, which is, of course, getting to merchandising. Now, the reason I like to call this the merchandising step of the bridge is because we can think of it like an internal distribution of the content that is being produced. If we have planned well and that they are creating lots of assets from big ideas and our publishing schedule may be looking forward here instead of always looking like a to-do list, in other words, we've been planning and we most likely are completing assets that may or may not be needed or utilized for publishing for weeks, sometimes even months. Additionally, we may want to ensure that the assets that are completed and utilized in some campaign and that performed very well are easily findable and can be reused. And so one of the responsibilities that needs a planning component is to internally shelve and communicate to the rest of the business all the content that could be used or that will be used or that is available for use. This is a content merchandising strategy. You can think about it like this. There's this new content product that created based on our strategy, and then there's old content product that deserves to be reused. Someone or some team has to be responsible for making decisions in a planning process about what, where, and how both categories should be internally promoted and distributed so that it can be utilized, activated, and published according to its need. This is content merchandising. It's an internal communication process. Now, I realize that many teams are small, so this planning process may just be you, quite frankly, as a team. You might be a team of 1 in marketing that's continually going back to old blog posts, scheduling them to be reused as part of your social publishing strategy. Or, quite frankly, you may be a larger team who once a week reviews what has come off the assembly line and communicates to sales and the web team all the things that are going to be available. That's the next step in this process. Or it could be requests that have come in from sales or demand generation teams or even your CEO to say, can we have a piece of content that covers this? And the planning process is, hey, here it is. It already exists and you should go find it here and tell us if you want to repackage it into something else. Creating a planning process for the merchandising of your content. And that gets us to the 4th step in the content creation bridge or workflow process, and that is activation. Activation and promotion. Now, again, in a small marketing team of 1 or 2 or 3 people, you may be the person who plans content, creates it, opens up Photoshop, designs it, then uploads it to your website and publishes it to the blog and posts all of that to sort of activate it on social media. But whether you're a team of 1 or, again, a team of 100, there is still a benefit to developing an activation planning process as part of your overall content planning. There's an optimal order to putting to your content into market. You may want to ensure that you're not only publishing the core piece out, but you also update any relevant content that needs to be updated because of it. Or you also schedule the organic promotion with that content or the paid promotion of it, or that you're going to repeat the promotion for some period of time and that you align it with other groups that are doing the same thing. Put simply, you are planning and making decisions about what, where, and why things will be promoted. So for example, coming back to our financial services company, they might launch one of their explainer videos on their blog, then that day and each day for a week, they would add a promotion to that blog post to their social channels. Then they also noted that the core mobile app, well, that needs to be updated as well, so the product people would need a good week's notice to be able to update them. Then they also plan to have the interview with the host or the influencer run on the blog once a week after that launch, and do the same kind of thing for social promotional posts for the interview as well. By the way, they also need to communicate that to PR so that a press release can go out upon each of these new classes that are going out or whatever it is. And they also plan for a small paid advertising campaign for Google to help promote each of these classes. Each of these then repeat that process for the next 2 weeks. So each video got 1 month of focused attention, and all of that happened, and you get the idea. It's about having a planning process for activating our content. Does everything need a separate process? Well, no, that would be too complex. You'll develop patterns, workflows, different templates, if you will, or categories of content that fit into these certain template processes. Which brings us to our fifth and last piece of the responsibilities to map in your content planning bridge, and that is, of course, last but certainly not least, measurement. Now, of course, we tackled the process of measuring goals in a completely other Marketing Makers episode, so that's not what we're talking about here. Remember, this is how we're planning content creation based on the measurement that we've already conducted offline somewhere. What we're doing now is establishing the decision-making process for how we will create measurement. In other words, just like every other step, it's about instilling a decision-making or planning process. Who will be responsible for tracking the measurement? Who will be accountable for getting the numbers in? Who will be consulted for it? Who will ultimately need to be informed by it? We may be tracking a number of things here, everything from consumption metrics, things like visits and SEO score and downloads and fills and shares, to cost metrics. What was the cost of the production of the asset, the production of the content, the time to produce all of it, etc. This is ultimately going to be what feeds us back around to the strategy and planning that helps us understand what content topics are to be utilized again, which ones are not performing, which assets are performing versus content, which ones we should double down on, re-promote, and reactivate. And then, well, we can put it all together. When you put it all together, your planning process and your high-level workflow and your content and how it builds and stabilizes a bridge between your content and your overall business or marketing strategy, it might end up looking a little like this. Now, at first glance, this feels really complicated. But if you can just draw this out, even if it's just you and a colleague, you can really start to identify where a planning process might help alleviate challenges in your ability to create and deliver content at scale. So example, remember our little financial services company we just talked about? Well, their proposed content planning process documents where 70% of what they're going to produce, including content that is advertising, marketing, thought leadership, that will be proactively created in their team, planned with decisions. 70% will be proactively created. Remember, we started with all of that content being simply requests from the organization and being an on-demand vending machine of content. Well, now 70% of it will be the other way around. Planned, set out, forward-looking, looking out into the future, planning the bigger stories that go into multiple containers. Now, is 70% of that content too big a number for you? Maybe, maybe not. Anything greater than 0 is a big step. Then, for them, 30%, as you can see in the lower half of this, will be reactive, based on either updates that need to be made from the website or requests from other parts of the organization, like sales say they need something new, something repackaged, something emergency, the CEO wants it this way. Now what happens what if it's not 70-30? What if this balance isn't maintained? Well, then they know that they need to plan or create their planning process to rebalance and make their decision-making processes accordingly. That's a great content creation planning process. Then, as you can see, they started to decide to assemble a cross-functional team of marketing and sales to get everybody into this planning process, everybody that is now part of this process and their stake in it. What content gets done first, second, with the goal of putting those out to few big ideas and lots of smaller ideas. Then you can see that they'll produce the shared calendar that will cover the entire life cycle of their content and their planning process with the rest of the organization and send those projects to production. Now, that might be an agency, it might be their internal team, it might be a number of people, it might be multiples of those people. But when they come back, Well, then the planning is made for the merchandising, the scheduling, because why? Well, life may have changed, priorities may have changed, but they will go through their merchandising planning process to be activated as necessary and as per the calendar. They're then published and then activated, measured, and they come back to the cross-functional teams as they need. It's a process. It's a workflow. Now, there's more detail here, of course, including the granular step of who does what and when and how does it go through the systems and the technology. But this is the foundation of a content creation process that helps a business get out of the constant reaction mode of content and into something truly strategic. And well, that's what we're really after, isn't it? I love carnivals. Even when the games are fixed, I love to play them because I'm not just making it up as I go. Plans may be useless, but planning is indeed one of the most valuable activities we can do, especially when it comes to creating content. The real key to planning is actually focusing on the true outputs. A great strategic planning process is a continuous decision-making process on what to do, not necessarily on how it will get done. Obviously, how it will get done can affect the decision on what to do, but if we always start with how, then we're never really ensuring that the what was all that important to begin with. In the end, content creation without planning is expressing ideas without commitment. If we all believe in what we want to say, it pays to plan on continuously deciding that we're actually saying it. Until I see you next month, it's your story to tell. Tell it well.